Hello, I'm SA, your AI essayist. Please note that all content, audio and video in this presentation are AI generated. As AI can sometimes produce inaccuracies, I encourage you to verify any factual information presented. With that in mind, let's begin.
A shadow falls long and deep across the early history of relativity, a silhouette often relegated to the footnotes of a far more famous story. To understand its shape, one must travel back to the Zurich of 1896, to the formidable stone halls of the Swiss Polytechnic Schule, the Swiss Federal Polytechnic. This institution was a crucible for the new physics taking shape at the close of the 19th century, a place where the classical certainties of Newton were beginning to fray under the pressure of new, perplexing phenomena. Into this demanding world stepped a young Serbian woman, Mileva Marić. Her admission into Section 6A, the elite diploma course for physics and mathematics, was itself a profound statement. She was the fifth woman ever to be accepted into this program, and the only one in her cohort, a solitary female mind among a group of ambitious young men, including a certain Albert Einstein. Her presence there was the culmination of a remarkable and determined academic journey. Having completed her secondary education in Novi Sad and Zagreb, she demonstrated a precocious talent for mathematics and physics, compelling her farther to secure special permission for her to attend lectures at the all-male Royal Classical High School in Zagreb. Her subsequent studies in Switzerland, first at the University of Zurich for a semester, before transferring to the Polytechnic, underscore relentless pursuit of scientific knowledge. Securing a place at the Polytechnic required passing a fearsome mature or entrance examination, a test she navigated with distinction. This achievement was a testament to a mind already steeped in the foundational principles of physics and equipped with the mathematical tools to explore its frontiers. The curriculum awaiting Marić and her classmates was a rigorous immersion into the vanguard of late 19th century thought. The central pillars were the theoretical frameworks that were actively challenging and expanding the mechanical worldview. Students grappled with the elegant, yet conceptually demanding, field equations of James Clerk Maxwell, which unified electricity, magnetism, and light into a single theory of electromagnetism. They delved into the profound implications of thermodynamics, particularly through the lens of Hermann von Helmholtz, whose work on the conservation of energy provided a universal principle governing physical processes. This was a curriculum that demanded more than rote memorization. It required a deep, intuitive grasp of integral and differential calculus and the ability to apply these abstract mathematical structures to tangible physical problems. It is the language of change of fields and potentials of energy flow and entropy. The surviving academic records provide a clear, quantitative measure of Marić's aptitude in this environment. At the intermediate diploma examinations of the late 1898, her performance was stellar. She earned a grade of 5.5 out of a possible 6 in physics, a score identical to that of Albert Einstein. In applied physics, the practical coursework conducted in the laboratory, she earned the highest possible mark. These figures paint a portrait of a student fully in command of the material, a thinker capable of navigating both the theoretical abstractions of Maxwell's equations and the hands-on, experimental realities of the laboratory. Her surviving lecture notes, meticulous and detailed, further reveal a mind actively engaged, absorbing and processing the complex ideas presented by her professors. The intellectual atmosphere of the Polytechnic was shaped by its faculty, and two figures in particular were central to Marić's education. The first was Professor Heinrich Friedrich Weber, the head of the Physics Institute. Weber was a respected experimentalist, and his laboratory was a primary training ground for students like Marić and Einstein. Initially, Marić provided under his tutelage her high marks in his practical courses attesting to her skill. His lectures, while perhaps rooted in a more classical perspective, provided the essential experimental grounding against which new theories would be tested. The eventual friction that developed between Weber and Einstein, and by extension Marić, would later have significant consequences for both of their academic careers. The second towering intellectual influence was the mathematician Hermann Minkowski. That his groundbreaking work on the four-dimensional geometry of spacetime lay a few years in the future. His lectures on geometry and number theory were already legendary for their depth and rigor. For a student of mathematical physics like Marić, Minkowski's courses offered an indispensable toolkit, a way of thinking about space, quantity, and structure that transcended simple calculation. It was in Minkowski's conceptual world that the geometric language necessary to articulate the theory of relativity would eventually be forged. Marić's exposure to his thought provided her with a mathematical sophistication that was absolutely critical for engaging with the physical problems that so fascinated her and her classmate, Einstein. It was within this shared intellectual landscape that the relationship between Mileva Marić and Albert Einstein took root and blossomed. Their connection, from its very inception, was one of profound intellectual kinship. They were drawn together by a mutual passion for physics, a shared sense of impatience with the dogmas of their professors, and an exhilarating feeling of being on the cusp of a revolution in human understanding. Einstein's own letters from this period are the most powerful testament to the intellectual parity he perceived between them. He addresses her as his equal, his doctoral or little doll, a term of endearment that coexisted with a deep respect for her mind. He wrote to her about his readings of Helmholtz, Hertz, and Boltzmann, treating her as a fellow investigator, a sounding board for his emerging ideas. His correspondence is filled with phrases that positioned her as a collaborator in his intellectual journey. "You're a brave little woman," he wrote, praising her diligence and insight. He eagerly awaited her thoughts on his ideas, expressing his curiosity about her own work and whether her approaches would yield fruit. This was the dialogue of two minds deeply intertwined, wrestling with the same formidable questions about the nature of light, motion, and the mysterious ether that was thought to permeate all of space. By the turn of the century, as they prepared for their final examinations, Mileva Marić was a physicist of demonstrable talent and formidable training. Her identity as a scientist was firmly established, built on a foundation of academic excellence and a deep immersion in the core problems of her day. The stage was now set for their intellectual partnership to enter its most intense and consequential phase, a period where their shared quest would move from the lecture halls of Zurich into a crucible of collaborative creation, documented in the very letters that passed between them. Their separation after graduation, with Albert securing a temporary teaching post and Mileva returning to her family in Serbia, transformed their intellectual partnership. The vibrant, daily discourse of the Zurich Polytechnic gave way to a new forum, one preserved for history, with remarkable, if incomplete, clarity of the correspondence. These letters, exchanged between 19 and 1903, document a period of profound creative ferment. They are artifacts of a shared mental world, a space where personal affection and formidable scientific problems were woven together so tightly that they became indistinguishable. The pages are filled with the language of two people deeply in love, yet they simultaneously function as laboratory notebooks charting the progress of a joint intellectual campaign against the frontiers of physics. The problems they tackled were the central enigmas of their time. Their letters reveal a mutual obsession with the perplexing nature of the ether, that hypothetical medium thought to carry light weights. They dissected the contradictions between James Clerk Maxwell's elegant equations of electromagnetism and the steadfast principles of Newtonian mechanics. One can almost feel the texture of the paper, the urgency of the ink, as they debate the experiments of Philip Leonard on the photoelectric effect, questioning his interpretations and sensing a deeper principle at play. This was a dialogue of equals, a relentless back and forth of ideas, calculations, and critiques. Albert would send his latest thought experiments, and Mileva would respond with her analysis, her mathematical checks, and her own conceptual contributions. A tangible product of this long-distance collaboration was Albert's very first scientific paper, published in the prestigious in der Physik in 1901. The topic was capillarity, the phenomenon of liquids rising in narrow tubes. While his name alone appears on the publication, the preceding letters tell a more complex story. Their discussions on molecular forces and thermodynamics formed the bedrock of the paper's theoretical development. He wrote to her about their shared ideas on the topic. Treating the investigation as a common project, her role, as suggested by the correspondence, was that of a primary intellectual partner, a collaborator, in the foundation thinking that led to the final, published work. The paper stands as a monument, perhaps an unwitting one, to the productivity of their intellectual union during this period. The most compelling evidence of their shared endeavor emerges in a letter from Albert dated 27 March 1901. In a moment of unguarded enthusiasm, he writes of his deep desire for them to be reunited and to continue their work together. He then pens a sentence that has become the cornerstone of the entire debate surrounding Mileva's legacy. How happy and proud I will be when the two of us together will have brought our work on relative motion to a victorious conclusion. The phrase is unambiguous. He speaks of our work, a joint enterprise focused on the very problem that would, 4 years later, blossom into the theory of special relativity. The use of the plural possessive, our, is a consistent feature of their scientific discussions. He refers to our theory in our paper, framing their intellectual output as a collective asset. Historiographically, interpreting this language presents a fascinating challenge. One could, with a certain cynical detachment, dismiss it as the affectionate parlance of a couple, a romantic conflation of their lives and their work. Yet, to do so would be to ignore the sheer technical specificity of the context in which this language appears. When Albert Einstein writes of our work on relative motion, he is referencing a specific, technically demanding, and world-altering problem in theoretical physics. He is writing to his only intellectual peer, a woman whose training and abilities he knew intimately and respected profoundly. The most direct reading of the text suggests that he viewed their investigation into the principle of relativity as a shared quest. During these years, Mileva Marić functioned as his essential sounding board. Her rigorous mathematical training, particularly her facility with the physics of heat and thermodynamics, provided a perfect complement to his more intuitive, conceptual leaps. She was the person who could check the calculations, question the premises, and ground his soaring thoughts in the firm soil of physical and mathematical consistency. Her contributions were likely dialectical and formative. She was the anvil against which his ideas were forged, shaped, and refined. The conventions of academic publication at the turn of the century offered few pathways for such informal, yet essential, collaborations to be formally recognized. The title page of a journal article had room for the author, the individual who penned the final draft, leaving the complex web of dialogue, critique, and shared discovery to fade into the uncorded background. Therefore, the correspondence from this period provides a powerful, if circumstantial, foundation for understanding her role. It establishes a clear and undeniable pattern of shared intellectual labor on the most advanced problems in physics. The letters paint a portrait of a partnership, a crucible where two brilliant minds merged their efforts. They show Mileva Marić operating at the highest level, deeply engaged in the theoretical work that would soon change the world. The evidence within these fragile pages sets the stage for the ultimate question. It compels us to look forward to the miraculous year of 1905 and to ask how this documented collaboration manifested in the 4 revolutionary papers that would forever be associated with the name Einstein. The epistolary record provides the premise. The papers themselves present the enduring and profound enigma. The epistolary record provides the premise. The papers themselves present the enduring and profound enigma. The year 1905 arrived with an intellectual force that still reverberates to the foundations of modern science. From the modest apartment in Bern, a cascade of ideas emerged that would irrevocably alter humanity's understanding of light, matter, time, and space. This was Annus Mirabilis, the miracle year, and at its heart lie 4 papers published in the prestigious German journal in der Physik. These documents represent the culmination of the shared intellectual journey, the final product of the intense dialogue and collaborative problem-solving that filled the couple's letters and their life together. To untangle the question of Mileva Marić's contribution is to become a historiographical detective, examining the scientific content of these works for fingerprints and echoes of her documented expertise. 2 of the papers, while revolutionary, aligned with remarkable precision to the specific areas of physics Marić had studied and discussed with Albert. The paper on Brownian motion offered a powerful theoretical explanation for the erratic, zigzagging dance of pollen grains suspended in water. This phenomenon, observed for decades, lacked a rigorous mathematical foundation. The solution presented in the Bern paper provided one, demonstrating that this random movement was the visible effect of unseen atoms and molecules colliding with the pollen. This was a masterstroke of statistical mechanics, a field deeply rooted in the theories of heat and thermodynamics, subjects where Marić demonstrably excelled during her time at the Swiss Federal Polytechnic. Her fascination with heat conduction and the kinetic theory of gases, documented in her own academic pursuits and their correspondence, provided the exact intellectual toolkit required to tackle the problem. The paper furnished a method to calculate the size of atoms, and Avogadro's number, transforming the atomic hypothesis from a useful chemical concept into a verifiable physical reality. Similarly, the paper on the photoelectric effect confronted a vexing experimental puzzle. Physicists had observed that shining light on a metal surface could eject electrons, but the energy of these electrons depended on the light's frequency, its color, and was independent of its intensity. This behavior was completely at odds with James Clerk Maxwell's elegant wave theory of light. The 1905 paper proposed a daring solution, building upon Max Planck's recent work on blackbody radiation. It postulated that light energy itself is quantized, arriving in discrete packets, or let's quantize what we now call photons. The energy of each quantum is proportional to its frequency. This simple, powerful idea explained the experimental results perfectly. Here again, the intellectual lineage points toward a shared ground. Both Albert and Mileva were avid followers of Planck's work, and the concept of quantization was at the absolute cutting edge of theoretical physics, a subject ripe for the kind of deep, collaborative dissection their letters so vividly describe. The third and fourth papers form a conceptual whole, presenting the theory we now call special relativity. The first, on the electrodynamics of moving bodies, is arguably the most famous. It confronted the deepest contradiction in 19th century physics, the conflict between the classical mechanics of Newton and the electromagnetic theory of Maxwell. According to Newton, velocities are simply additive. For Maxwell, the speed of light in a vacuum is a universal constant, a value, c, that remains the same for all observers regardless of their motion. The 1905 paper resolved this paradox through a radical reconceptualization of reality itself. It began with two deceptively simple postulates: first, that the laws of physics are the same for all observers in uniform motion, and second, that the speed of light is constant for all observers. The consequences derived from these two principles were earth-shattering. They led to the relativity of simultaneity, time dilation, and length contraction. Space and time were longer absolute, but were interwoven into a single continuum, space-time, whose measurements depended on the observer's frame of reference. The second paper, a short addendum, derived the most famous equation in history from these principles: E equals mc squared, revealing the equivalence of mass and energy. Their shared readings of Henry Poincaré and their deep study of the transformations developed by Hendrik Lorentz provided the essential background for this breakthrough. The question for the historian is how these influences were processed. Was Merrick a passive sounding board, or an active partner in the conceptual struggle to reinterpret Lorentz's mathematical formulas as statements about the fundamental nature of reality? The correspondence suggests the latter. Albert's references to our work and our theory in the context of relative motion are too consistent to be dismissed as mere terms of endearment. They suggest a joint intellectual ownership of the problem. This body of circumstantial evidence is bolstered by a singular, explosive piece of direct testimony. The respected Soviet physicist Abraham Joff, a giant in his own right, wrote in a 1955 biographical preface about the history of physics. Recalling his time as an assistant to Wilhelm Röntgen, who was on the editorial board of the Annalen der Physik *, Joff stated that he had seen the original manuscripts submitted in 1905. He wrote that the author of the papers was a then-unknown bureaucrat at the patent office in Bern named Einstein Marić. Marić is the Hungarian variant of Merrick. Joff's recollection, published decades later, provides the only known eyewitness account suggesting a formal, co-authored submission. Of course, this account carries its own set of analytical burdens. It was a memory recalled 50 years after the event. The original manuscripts, which could settle the matter definitively, are lost. Furthermore, Joff was writing within the Soviet system, where narratives emphasizing collective effort over individual genius were sometimes favored. Yet, Joff was a scientist of immense integrity, and his statement was specific and unambiguous. He identified the author with a compound name, a Swiss custom for a married couple, linking Mileva directly to the creation of the papers by name. Dismissing his testimony requires a compelling reason, and none has emerged. It stands as a powerful, if solitary, pillar supporting the case for her co-authorship. Ultimately, the evidence surrounding the 1905 papers leaves us with a picture of profound synergy. The surviving documents show a partnership of two minds, steeped in the same literature, wrestling with the same problems, and celebrating our work in their private letters. Marić's documented academic strengths in thermodynamics and kinetic theory map directly onto the intellectual requirements of the Brownian motion paper. Their joint fascination with the frontiers of physics, from Planck's quanta to Poincaré's musings on relativity, formed the crucible for all four papers. The Joff testimony provides a tantalizing glimpse of how this collaboration might have been formally acknowledged before the historical record was sanitized, perhaps by Albert himself, into a story of singular genius. The miracle here appears less a miracle of one man than a miracle of a partnership, a rare and potent intellectual fusion that, for a brief, brilliant period, illuminated the deepest mysteries of the universe. This moment represents the zenith of their shared world, a peak from which the path forward would tragically diverge. The intellectual summit reached in 1905 presented a formidable new horizon. The principle of relativity, as formulated in the Annus Mirabilis *, applied beautifully to systems in uniform motion, yet it remained silent on the profound and universal experiences of acceleration and gravity. This limitation became the central intellectual problem of Albert Einstein's next decade, a challenge demanding a conceptual leap far beyond the physics he and Mileva Marić had mastered together in Zurich. The quest to generalize relativity would require a new language, a new logic, and ultimately, a new set of collaborators, charting a course that diverged sharply from the shared intellectual landscape of their earlier partnership. This new physics began with a deceptively simple insight. What Einstein would later call his happiest thought: a person in free fall feels no weight. This equivalence principle, linking gravity and acceleration, suggested that gravity was perhaps an artifact of geometry, a curvature in the very fabric of space-time. To describe such a universe, the familiar tools of Euclidean geometry and algebraic physics were insufficient. The problem expanded, becoming one of profound mathematical structure. It required the arcane and powerful formalisms of differential geometry, a field pioneered by Bernhard Riemann, and its practical application through the tensor calculus developed by Italian mathematicians Gregorio Ricci-Bastro and Tullio Levi-Saviter. This was mathematics of a different order, an abstract world of covariant derivatives and metric tensors that described how measurements and physical laws transform on curved, multidimensional surfaces. This mathematical chasm represents the most significant and demonstrable point of intellectual divergence between Marić and Einstein. Marić's education at the Zurich Polytechnic excellent as it was, focused on the physics of her day, Maxwell's electromagnetism, thermodynamics, and kinetic theory. Her documented strengths lay in analyzing physical phenomena and their underlying mathematical descriptions within that established framework. The highly specialized, non-Euclidean geometries needed for general relativity were absent from her curriculum, and, according to all available records from her subsequent intellectual pursuits, Einstein himself struggled mightily with this new language. His letters from this period are filled with his battle to grasp the concepts. He famously turned to his old university friend, the gifted mathematician Marcel Grossmann, with a desperate plea for guidance. It was Grossmann who introduced Einstein to Riemannian geometry and tensor calculus, acting as the essential mathematical navigator for Einstein's physical intuition. The joint 1913 paper, The Entwurf or Outline Theory, stands as a testament to this new, necessary collaboration. It was a partnership built on a different axis of expertise, one where Einstein provided the physical insight and Grossmann provided the geometric machinery. While Einstein was wrestling with tensors in Zurich and later in Berlin, Marić's life was undergoing a parallel and devastating dissolution. The couple's move to Berlin in 1914, where Einstein accepted a prestigious professorship, proved to be the breaking point. Isolated in a city she disliked, amidst a circle of Einstein's relatives who were openly hostile to her, the marriage collapsed. The letters from this period paint a bleak picture. Einstein presented her with a list of cruel and humiliating conditions under which he would agree to continue living with her for the sake of the children, demanding she serve his meals in his room and cease all personal relations with him, expecting no intimacy and forbidding her from sitting with him at home or traveling with him. Her world, once centered on a shared intellectual passion, had shrunk to the confines of a broken home and the immense responsibilities of motherhood. She was caring for their two sons, Hans Albert and Eduard, the younger of whom, Tiet, was beginning to show signs of the serious mental illness that would later dominate his life and hers. Her energies were consumed by domestic crisis and profound emotional distress, creating conditions antithetical to the sustained, high-level abstract thinking required to engage with the frontiers of theoretical physics. The formal end of their union came with the divorce decree of the 1999, a document that has since become a central battlefield in the debate over Marić's legacy. Within its clauses lies a peculiar and much disputed provision. Einstein committed to depositing the funds from any future Nobel Prize into a Swiss bank account. Marić would have control over the interest generated by this capital, while the principal itself would be held in trust for their sons. For some scholars, this clause is the smoking gun, an implicit acknowledgement of an old intellectual debt. They interpret it as a guilt payment, a belated and private financial settlement for her uncredited contributions to the 1905 papers. It is an emotionally resonant argument suggesting that Einstein, on the cusp of global fame, was quietly settling accounts for the work they had done together in Bern. A closer examination of the document and the surrounding circumstances, however, supports a more pragmatic, if less romantic, interpretation. As legal and historical analysis by scholars like Robert Schulman has shown, the provision functions as an elaborate and forward-thinking instrument for child support. In 1909, Einstein was a professor with a comfortable, yet finite, income. The Nobel Prize was a distinct possibility, but far from a certainty. By earmarking this potential future windfall, he was creating a substantial trust for his children's long-term security, a matter of pressing concern given Eduard's deteriorating health. The legal structure of the arrangement, granting Marić access only to the interest, reinforces its purpose as a vehicle for ongoing support rather than a one-time payment for past work. The arrangement ensured that the capital would remain intact for the boys, providing for their futures and, especially, for the immense costs of Eduard's lifelong medical care. The clause appears less a confession of co-authorship and more a reflection of parental responsibility, executed through an unconventional financial mechanism. By the time the final, elegant field equations of general relativity were published in late 1915, Einstein's primary intellectual interlocutor was the great German mathematician David Hilbert. They were engaged in a stimulating, competitive race to the finish line, a conversation conducted at the highest echelons of mathematical physics. The scientific world that had once revolved around a desk shared with Mileva Marić in a small Bern apartment had vanished completely. Her name is absent from the acknowledgments, the collaborators, and the correspondence of this period of monumental creation. The intellectual threads had unraveled. The shared journey that began with passionate letters about physics and culminated in the revolution of the 1905 had reached its terminus. The silence from Marić was complete, a silence born of personal tragedy, immense domestic burden, and intellectual world that had moved into a mathematical territory she was unequipped and unable to enter. Her story from this point forward would be one of survival, memory, and the stewardship of the very funds that continued to fuel a debate over her name. The formal separation in 1999 marked a definitive cleaving of worlds. While Albert Einstein ascended into a global icon, faded in lecture calls from Princeton to Tokyo, Mileva Marić's universe contracted with brutal finality. The intellectual cosmos they once navigated together, a space defined by Maxwell's equations and the puzzles of light, gave way to a landscape of stark terrestrial concerns. Her new problems possessed a different kind of intractability, revolving around financial solvency, the raising of two sons alone, and the preservation of a fragile peace in the wake of a fractured marriage. The letters that once flew between them, vibrating with scared discovery and intellectual passion, were replaced by sparse, formal communications concerning household finances and the welfare of their children, Hans Albert and Eduard. The shared mind had been partitioned, its assets liquidated into alimony and visitation rights. A profound and telling irony lies in the disposition of the 1921 Nobel Prize in Physics, awarded to Albert for his 1905 paper on the photoelectric effect, a cornerstone of their shared asterisk annus mirabilis asterisk. The prize money itself was, by prior divorce agreement, transferred directly to Mileva. This capital, the ultimate symbol of scientific recognition, became her primary tool for survival. It was a material legacy of the very work whose intellectual parentage remains so fiercely debated. With these funds, she purchased apartment buildings in Zurich, creating an income stream to support herself and her sons. The money that originated from a revolutionary insight into the quantum nature of light was thus transmuted into rent payments and grocery bills. It was a practical, profound application of physics' highest honor, a testament to the divergence of their paths. One partner used the era's intellectual triumphs to reshape humanity's understanding of the cosmos. The other used their financial fruits to secure a roof over her children's heads. This burden of stewardship grew immensely heavier with the emergent tragedy of their younger son, Eduard, whom they affectionately called Tiet. A brilliant and sensitive young man with aspirations in music and medicine, Edgeworth began to exhibit signs of severe mental illness in his early 20s. His diagnosis of schizophrenia in 1930 marked the beginning of a long, painful decline that would consume his mother's remaining years and resources. The intellectual energy, while once directed toward the study of thermal conductivity and kinetic theory, was now wholly repurposed for the devastatingly complex challenge of navigating Edgeworth's care. This involved a draining cycle of doctors, treatments, and eventually long-term institutionalization at the Burgosli Psychiatric Clinic in Zurich. The financial pressures were immense. The properties purchased with the Nobel money were sold off, one by one, to cover the escalating costs of his care, leaving her in a precarious state by the end of her life. Her final decades were a quiet, desperate battle fought on the front lines of maternal devotion, a world away from the abstract glories of theoretical physics. She died in Zurich in 1948, her passing going almost entirely unnoticed by the scientific community that once held her as a promising peer. Her story, fading into obscurity and rediscovered only decades later, presents modern scholarship with a profound historiographical dilemma. It compels a direct confrontation with the very mechanics of how scientific history is written and how credit is assigned. The case of Mileva Marić forces an examination of the epistemic challenges inherent in assessing undocumented, intimate, and domestic collaborations. When the laboratory is a living room, when the chalkboard is a shared dinner table, and when the primary records are love letters, the conventional metrics of authorship and contribution dissolve. The neat lines of individual genius, so beloved in traditional narratives of science, become hopelessly blurred. Her life becomes a powerful case study, illustrating the limitations of a historical model that privileges the published paper and the public pronouncement over the formative, private dialogue that precedes them. To frame the debate as a binary choice, declaring her either the silent co-architect of relativity or a simple sounding board, is to miss the more vital and unsettling implications of her biography. Her ultimate significance for the history of science resides within this very ambiguity. She personifies the inherent weakness of the great man paradigm of discovery, a model that imagines scientific breakthroughs as bolts of lightning from a singular, isolated mind. The detailed correspondence from their early years reveals a different process, entirely a dynamic, reciprocal, and deeply intertwined intellectual partnership. It suggests a networked model of creation where concepts are forged, tested, and refined through a crucible of conversation, mutual critique, and shared intellectual struggle. The question ceases to be about slicing up a finished theory and assigning percentages of ownership. The more illuminating inquiry explores the nature of the collaborative system that produced the theory in the first place, a system in which her presence was clearly a critical component. Mileva Marić's life stands as a poignant symbol of the formidable structural barriers that historically impeded the progress of women in science. Her intellectual trajectory was shaped and ultimately curtailed by a sequence of forces external to her own considerable talents. The societal expectations of marriage, the immense and uncredited labor of motherhood, and the personal dynamics of her relationship with an increasingly famous spouse all conspired to channel her intellectual energies away from a formal career and into the domestic sphere. She represents an entire category of brilliant women whose scientific potential was absorbed into the lives and careers of their husbands, their contributions becoming an invisible substrate upon which more visible legacies were built. Her story is a stark reminder that access to the halls of science has always been mediated by more than intellectual merit alone. It is a testament to the countless lost Einsteins whose names we will never know because their journey was halted at the threshold of marriage, the nursery, or the kitchen. The enduring legacy of Mileva Marić Einstein is therefore a powerful and disruptive question mark appended to the grand narrative of 20th century physics. She is the ghost in the machine of modern science, her spectral presence forcing a re-examination of our most cherished myths about genius and discovery. Her life demands that we look beyond the polished facade of the finished equation and into the messy, human, and collaborative reality of its creation. It compels a more honest and complete accounting, one that acknowledges the complex web of relationships, conversations, and shared labors that underpin scientific progress. Her contribution, in the end, is this profound and necessary disturbance, a persistent whisper from the past that continues to challenge our understanding of how knowledge is made, who gets to make it, and whose stories are remembered.
We really appreciate you tuning in to this AI-powered presentation. Our goal is to push the boundaries of AI in content creation, and your input is invaluable. If there's a particular subject you'd like to see us tackle next, or if you have suggestions on how we could fine-tune our AI's creative prompts, please don't hesitate to leave your ideas in the comments section. We're excited to bring you more unique content very soon.